How do you really sound? How to use your voice. The voice is another powerful tool for establishing rapport. The same principle is at play here. You adapt your own voice to the way the other person uses hers. Of course, again, this has to happen gradually and with discretion. And just as in the case of body language, there is no need for exact and perfect imitation. The fact is, even if you could get away with imitating somebody's body language perfectly, it would still seem extremely strange if you suddenly started sounding exactly like the person you're talking to. But there's always some quality of the other person's voice that you can adapt to, some trait you can at least approximate. Listen and see how he or she uses the following elements of speech. Tonality. Is it a deep or a light voice? Many men speak in a deeper voice than their larynxes are really made for, and many women speak in a lighter voice than they really ought to. This is because of cultural impact on our behavior. We believe ourselves to be emphasizing our masculinity or femininity this way. Fullness. Is it a rich voice with a lot of different timbres, or is it thin and airy? As a result of cultural imprints, we consider full and rich voices potent, serious, and reliable, while airy voices scam feminine and seductive. An airy voice can also make a childish impression. Melody. Is this a monotonous voice, which remains on a single tone all the time? Monotonous voices often don't use falling intonation at the end of a proposition, or rising intonation at the end of a question. This can often make it hard to understand what somebody with a monotonous voice really means. Was the person asking a question or making a claim? Or was it a joke, even? The counterpoint to this would be a melodic voice, which uses many different tones in speech. Scandinavians, especially Norwegians, are famous for their melodic and song-like speech. Tempo. Is this person speaking quickly or slowly? We speak at the same speed as we think and understand things, so if you speak slower than people you are talking to, you will bore them into thinking about something other than the message you're trying to communicate. At worst, this could cause them to get restless and start waiting for you to finish so they can wrap up the conversation before it costs them any more time. On the other hand, if you speak faster than they are used to, you run the risk of losing them, and they might not pick up the important points of what you have to say. Men are commonly thought to speak faster than women, but this is a false stereotype. Researcher Tyler McBellan found that women in mixed gender settings actually slowed down their speech tempo to allow men to be those who spoke the fastest even when they really weren't. Strength and volume. Adapting to somebody else's volume is a good tactic. A soft-spoken person will appreciate you quoting your voice down. Somebody who belts his words out in speech will respect you more if you raise the volume of your voice. As you can see, a voice has many different properties for you to mirror. If you're going to choose just one thing to work with, I'd recommend you adapt your tempo. Rapport is, to a great extent, a matter of mirroring the other person's tempo, and in the case of speech it produces especially good results. Some claim that adapting your vocal tempo is the most important technique for establishing rapport. I'm not sure that's entirely true, but it is a very powerful technique. The voice is especially important, since it is sometimes the only tool we have for communication on the phone. For instance, Zucker, whom we mentioned earlier, reports on a study performed on behalf of a telemarketing company that wanted to increase its revenues. It sold magazine subscriptions, and for this reason it was in contact with catch prospective customer once, or at the most twice, before it had either failed or closed the deal. For the experiment, the sales team was divided into two groups. One group continued to work the same way they had done previously, while the other was given an extra instruction: try to pace your speech to that of the person you're calling. Using only this difference in methodology, the latter group increased its sales by almost 30%, while the first group made no improvement over the previous sales figures. I'll repeat that. All the latter group did was adapt the tempo of speech to the person the group was speaking to. Even if you're not in sales, a positive increase of almost 30% is a lot, no matter what you do and what your relationships are about, especially when all you have to do is keep track of how quickly or slowly you are speaking. We speak at the same pace as we think and understand things. If you speak in the same tempo as the person you are talking to, your thoughts are expressed at the same pace he or she is using to think. Idiom. Changing your expressions. The things we're about to discuss are not exactly wordless, but I'd still like to mention them since they offer you yet another way to get into good rapport with people. We all have preferred variations in the ways we use language. What follows are some examples of these kinds of personal touches and idioms used in language. In establishing rapport, it's always a good thing to be able to adapt to these or any other similar linguistic practices. Of course, you have to know enough about the cultural references involved to be able to adapt your communication in a believable way. Slang. Slang is quite difficult to adapt to, as it is specific to trends, geographical locations, and age groups. It is always changing, and an expression that's awesome today could be lame tomorrow. If you feel like you're savvy enough to mirror a certain kind of slang used by the person you want to be in rapport with, go for it. But if you don't know how to respond to "what's up bro," you're better off not trying. There is a lot of potential for embarrassment here. Slang also functions as a way of signaling that you belong to a certain group, an age group, for instance, so you also have to consider how likely you are to be taken seriously when representing yourself as a member of the group in question. If you come across a slang expression that signals an age group, and you're the wrong age to use it, you can show that you're hip enough to know the meaning of the word and respond to it. But that doesn't mean you should use it yourself unless you're entitled to it. That is to say, unless you could plausibly be seen as belonging to the group of people who share that particular slang usage. Jargon. In many conversations, expressions are used that are only needed for the specific topic of discussion. When you're talking about votes, voting terms are likely to be used. By using jargon to the same extent as the person you're talking to, you're showing him or her that you have the same understanding and knowledge of the topic. This goes both ways. If somebody uses more technical terms than you would normally, but you have the knowledge to adapt to the speech of the other, go ahead. If somebody uses fewer technical terms than you would normally, hold back on your own use of them. For example, if someone points at a screen or monitor and says, "The computer is broken," there's probably no point in asking him how many partitions he has on his C drive. Ask him if he's pressed the green on button. Personal experiences. Despite having spent a lot of time in school, very few people speak the way a grammar textbook tells you to. We tend to add superfluous, unnecessary words, like, all over the place, especially, at the end of a sentence and stuff. Or begin sentences with dependent clauses. If you hear somebody use expressions like this, do the same thing. Trance words. We all have favorite words, words we use a lot, in all kinds of situations. They could be slang expressions, bits of jargon, or something completely different. Often they'll be something we've picked up from someone else and made a habit of saying. We occasionally become painfully aware of these words. When we catch ourselves using one of them, we might burst out, "Guy, I have to stop saying awesome," but we have a lot of other favorite words that we don't always notice in this way. These words personalize our use of language and make it slightly different from everyone else's. Milton H. Erickson, the biggest name in modern hypnosis, APY, called these personal words trance words. As in hypnotic trance, a very fast way of getting into rapport with somebody is to pay attention to her trance words. That is, words she often uses when speaking, and then use those words yourself. You begin speaking her language, showing her you're just like her. And you will be clearly understood since you even use the same words when you speak. I understand if you're starting to feel that I'm asking too much of you. How are you supposed to listen to how somebody else is using her voice? Adapt your own voice to it, while discovering and following her personal language usage, preferably including an analysis of her syntax, and remember what you were going to say. Believe me, it's not as difficult as it sounds. Just as you already adapt your body language somewhat to others, you already do a lot of these things. Let me give you a mundane example of mind reading. I know that at some time, you ended a phone conversation, and the other people in the room with you knew who you'd been talking to without you having mentioned any names or given them any other clues during the conversation. When you asked them how they knew, they said they could hear it from the way you spoke. Sound familiar? I thought so. They could tell who you were talking to because you sounded like the person on the other end. That is to say, you adapted your voice and language to sound more like the person you were talking to. It was most likely somebody close to you, who you are in good rapport with. Remember, we want acceptance and respect. We want social interaction. We want rapport. Breathe. Damn you. Breathe. Rapport by breathing. A basic method for effective rapport is to adapt your breathing to somebody else's. The thing most writers and instructors who teach this forget to mention is how insanely difficult it usually is to see somebody breathe. Even after extensive training, seeing how somebody is breathing can be almost impossible. I am not telling you not to bother. On the contrary, if you suddenly notice somebody's breathing, you could by all means adapt to his breathing pattern. Breathing is visible in different ways depending on how the person is breathing, heavily or lightly, with the chest or with the diaphragm. You should keep an eye on the person's stomach, chest, shoulders, and neck. Sometimes, you can find somebody's breathing rhythm by observing the movement of the shadow of his shoulders. You should also listen to the person's speech. We don't speak while inhaling, so by noticing where he pauses in his speech, you can tell when he is breathing in. The point of trying to follow somebody's breathing, that is, to breathe at the same speed and with the same intensity, is this: when you're breathing along with somebody, you are entering the same bodily tempo as the other person. This means that a lot of the things you would otherwise need to pay attention to for rapport purposes come naturally to you. When you change the tempo of your breathing, your body language and speech will follow automatically. It will also make it easier for you to find a matching voice level. If you can synchronize your breathing completely with that of another person, the connection between you can feel magical. Unfortunately, it's far from easy to do. Physical differences can sometimes even make it impossible to breathe exactly the same as somebody else. My ex-wife is about 5 feet 2 inches tall, and weighed 104 pounds when we were married. I am 5 feet 9 inches and weigh 163 pounds. On top of this, she breathed with her chest, which meant she inhaled less air than her lung capacity would have allowed. I couldn't follow her breathing for more than a minute before losing my breath. Of course, you're not supposed to be asphyxiating yourself by trying to follow somebody's breathing, but try to get your breathing as close as you can without struggling. As I said earlier, use your knowledge about the other person's tempo for alley-rhythmic actions, like nods or handshakes, so these motions will also be paced correctly and won't break your rapport. At first, you'll get good mileage out of trying to observe the person's general tempo rather than trying to follow his or her breathing exactly, and then beginning to breathe at that tempo without worrying about following catch and every breath. It's quite possible you will begin to follow the person's breathing exactly after a while, but even if you don't, you will have achieved the most important thing, synchronizing your general tempo. Noticing somebody's breathing and trying to breathe the same way is also a quick way to understand the mood somebody is in. This kind of knowledge is useful in situations where you feel like you're in rapport but that something is disturbing your relationship. Start following the other person's breathing. If you notice that the person is breathing fast and high up in the chest, even though she seems calm and safe, you can tell that there is most likely some concern she is trying to hide from you. This kind of information is priceless in a lot of situations. The best thing is that you don't need to remember which moods belong with which type of breathing. By simply breathing the way the other person is, you will feel the mood, in this case anxiety, yourself, and so you'll know exactly what emotional state she is in. Cuddle exercise. If you know somebody you can cuddle without having to explain that it is part of a rapport-making exercise, maybe your partner at home, you should cuddle that person in a way that makes his or her breathing very clear to you. Begin by noticing the vast difference between breathing in sync and breathing out of sync with each other. Follow the other's breathing for a minute or so, then carefully change the pace of your own breathing. If the other person follows your change unconsciously, you have established rapport by using your breathing. Hypnosis experts Martin Nirup and Lan Harding suggest trying this without any clothes on. If you are lucky enough to have somebody you can cuddle with in the nude, I'll recommend it be somebody you know. At sleep time, for instance, you should try breathing in and out of sync in those conditions. You will sense a very clear and tangible difference between, on the one hand, total connectedness, and on the other hand, an uncomfortable sense of being alienated from the person who is close to you.